Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. We do have a quorum, and I'd like to welcome and reintroduce our facilitators for this evening, Deanne Drummond and Ed Vada. Take it away, Ed.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to use this chair to prop my leg up, so it's good to be with you. There's basically two portions to this evening's work. So the first portion, which will be an open session, is just talking about superintendent evaluation, generically speaking, okay? Particularly with an eye towards 22-23. And then in closed session, we'll talk about the current evaluation system of the 21-22 school year to be the most effective facilitator for you guys. It would be helpful for us, and Deanne's going to capture some of this. The question is, so talk to us about what's the process and tool that y'all use right now, just generically speaking. Okay, we don't need to get down to the specifics, but what's your understanding of what that process is so that I get a sense of that?
The process of the evaluation?
Mm-hmm.
Currently, right?
Currently, right.
Well, currently the process is we do it on an annual basis.
Okay.
Normally we do it in January,
Okay.
but January slipped by us, and so we did it in February. We started it in February. We have gone through the goals of the district, the goals of the superintendent, but I think that's probably where we have a disconnect in that we weren't specific about our goals for the superintendent. And so I think we each had different ones, and that was how we used the instrument.
Okay. And so that instrument, I think, if I understand correctly, is the same instrument y'all have used for at least 2 or 3 years? Is that
It is.
okay. Either place. Thanks.
Good evening.
So, yeah, you need to read it.
No,
Okay.
no, we're still in open.
Okay, good. So, what else? There's a
I
rating
thought at
system.
some point we had used to do it every 6 months, that there would be like a mid-year and a full evaluation.
Yeah. So a formative and a summative, okay? And you used some tentative language I thought we did, and so it sounds like maybe there wasn't clarity about what we were doing this year. Is that fair? Okay. And what else?
So the goals that we have right now don't really have firm milestones, so it lends to very qualitative responses that aren't necessarily tied into a lot of the work that we've done over the past year and a half or so.
Okay.
So as we look at it, obviously alignment of superintendent goals to the goals that we set forth, and all of the conversations and items that we're benchmarking along the way is my ultimate desire, just to make sure that we have a clear roadmap and everything is aligned.
Okay. So it sounds like there's two pieces that I heard there. One was that, my words, that maybe they didn't have the level of specificity and measurement that would have helped us, okay? Those are my words. And the second is alignment with what we were doing this year. Is that fair?
And we'll adopt your work too.
Okay. The good news is you don't have to. But I just want to make sure that I'm representing it correctly. Who else?
I had a question. I think I heard that this instrument was used the last 2 to 3 years, but we had a previous instrument, which I brought today, and we've actually had various versions, and I'd like to know what the shift was, because there was a lot of board work behind picking the instrument that was identified and then making the shift. So can someone tell me what that shift was, what happened?
So it's a historical question
Yeah.
about how did we get
Yeah,
here?
how did we get to this? Because that was, again, in the estimation of my colleagues, and I'm sorry, none of them are here from that point, but it was more concise. It was a numerical evaluation system, and I know you've done a couple of them. Yeah, you as well. And so to get off of that, I don't know if there was something the board discussed that just wanted to be different, or, so I just, for perspective, because we'll be talking about that potential revisit in terms of an instrument as we talk about it today. So can I get
We
some
didn't
perspective?
revisit it, I know that. We just-
I think that the instrument depends, the reason it changed was the superintendent changed. And when we looked at what was necessary for an evaluation in the previous superintendent, it didn't naturally fit with what we were looking at with our new superintendent, and that's why it was changed.
The
You guys
actual-
agree with that?
The actual instrument change.
The
not
actual
Yes.
goals.
instrument.
Yes, the instrument change.
So not the-
And this is the one that TEA recommends that we're
Yes.
using now.
But and the goal.
And the other one was
And the
kind
goals.
of, the one we used prior to adopting this was a mishmash, or not a mishmash, a pull from here, pull from here, pull from here, add our own. To be very specific to that particular superintendent. And what that particular evaluation instrument measured, we needed something different.
So just let me give some background, see if this helps in this. If it doesn't, just tell me to move on. So in 2016, the law changed, okay? So in prior to 2016, there was what was considered the commissioner's approved instruments, okay? And generally had like 12 different categories. The first being a spreadsheet that actually came from Region 13, was where it was housed. It was where superintendents recorded the student performance of whatever the accountability and assessment system was at the time. And that was submitted by the superintendent to the board to address the first one. And it had things, the rest of the instrument had things like board relations, financial management, leadership, community relations, school culture. There were, like, again, 10 different things. And TASB, okay, was the one that kind of helped develop that. And there was a rating scale, and then there was boxes for comments. Okay. There were several versions of them, so some of them you did that, and then you did an overall score. Some didn't have an overall score, you just had categorical score. So that was prior to 2016. 2016, the rules changed, and they said that, number one, the commissioner could have a recommended, okay? And at that time, he didn't choose to, so what happened was we continued to use what we had always used, okay? TASB made a few changes to it. It's still out there. There's nothing wrong with using that one. The one thing that was clarified, that no matter what you use, you must include student performance data. Okay? That if you choose to create your own, the rule said that you should get involvement, not consent, okay, but involvement from like your site-based committee, so that they'd be aware that you're changing that, okay? And then lastly, in terms of good practice, in the TASB documentation, they say that obviously whatever the consensus of the team of 8 is, that the superintendent is informed of that, of course, obviously, because he or she, whoever sits in the chair, is being evaluated by that. So there were some changes over time. Those rules have not been updated since 2016, nor are we aware that there is any change coming, but that's kind of where it is. And then, of course, we have pandemic in the middle of that. And at that time, back in 2020, the commissioner allowed school districts to waive the evaluation should they choose to do it. So it was a one-time waiver, okay? The rules, the other rule that is in place prior to 2016, and still continues to be, is that a superintendent needs to have an evaluation at least every 15 months. If you go beyond the 15 months, you cannot use district funds to pay the superintendent. Okay? Which is, yeah, it's like, ouch.
So what would you pay, just theoretically speaking? Like, what would you use?
I have no idea because nobody's dared to do that because you would
Right.
be in breach of contract.
Yeah.
I mean, that creates a whole nother set
Yeah.
of issues, okay? So, or you'd be knocking at the door saying, we have, what's going on with governance here, okay? Now, there are some slight exceptions. So for example, let's say you have a superintendent that doesn't come to, you hire somebody off cycle, so to speak. That sometimes creates a transition where you may have, okay, we're gonna evaluate the first 6 months and then we'll get back on cycle, okay? And so you can do that and every district varies. So forgive me, but just some historical perspective on that. So the other thing is the tool should be agreed to every year, okay, by basically both parties, the board and the superintendent, which means it can change. Your goals may change, things may happen, but the critical piece is that people are aware of it at the beginning of the cycle. That's the part that's problematic sometimes. Okay? Now, there's sometimes good reasons to change those. Pandemic can be one of those. Things have to change because what we started with maybe is no longer germane or equally fair. So, but that's a discussion that goes on.
And then are you specifically referring to the instrument, not the goals? The instrument has to, on an annual basis, be approved bilaterally from board and superintendent.
That is correct, and that does include the goals as well. Okay, there should be this conversation. That conversation actually should be ongoing conversation. There are formal times when you do like maybe an informal, formative, and certainly a formal summative one. But the truth of the matter is the board can do it at any time. Okay? And we tell people every board meeting is really kind of a mini evaluation because you're getting data both ways. If there's something the board's not pleased with, they're letting their superintendent know. I mean, there should be no surprises, okay, basically. So, sorry, just interjecting that historical aspect to it.
So that I understand, the board then collectively had consensus to change the instrument? I mean, you guys, you changed it from the previous one? So there was consensus to move away from, because the other one, the benefit of that is that there were set goals that were established, and I don't know, I haven't even looked at this particular one, most part because we received it on Monday or Tuesday and we had to turn it in Thursday. There was just no way I was going to get to it. But in looking at that, does that have goals in it now, Mr. Shulman, or anybody? Is it set the way it is?
The way this is
Yeah,
written.
the current one.
There are not goals in here. Well, yeah, there
There are
are.
categories.
Yes, there are.
So the KPIs literally read effective instruction involving families and communities.
There are 8 categories.
Yeah, so again, as I consider what KPIs are to me, and I think to most organizations, there is some level of metric. And the category itself is not a goal. So that's part of the concern on my part.
So there's not clarity. So I think one of the things to add is that at least for one person, there isn't clarity about the measurement, is what I'm hearing, and the expectation. Okay. Now, I'm gonna purposely kind of keep it generic because this is open.
Sure.
Okay. Later, we'll get to a little deeper.
Well, and just for perspective too, I know that some were on the board prior to, and just, I guess we can talk about this in closed session. Some of the discussion I had with the attorney regarding information on the superintendent eval, which is not relevant, but just remember, let's talk about that later. But the goals were pretty clear on previous evaluations about rating superintendent progress based on those.
Mhm.
And they were very definitive. I'm not going to say what, but for example, increase by 5% the number of students taking AP exams. That's real specific, but the evaluation was tied in that narrowly so that we can evaluate student performance in that respect. And so I would say let's at least re-examine some of those things as we go through to see if they fit and see if it works with this model.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, so let's shift a little bit.
Sure.
Is as you look towards 22, 23, okay, what would you want in an instrument? So one thing I'm hearing is a level of specificity that reflects measurement, and a formula that we use, you don't have to use it, whether you call it KPI, balanced scorecard, whatever, there's a number of different frames. But to just smash it down, we just call it from X to Y by Z. In other words, where are we starting? Where do we want to go? And by when? Okay, so that, I'm just gonna make this up. If we want our fund balance to grow from, I'm making this totally up, obviously, 2 million to 6 million by, I'm gonna say, 2024, okay? Now you're gonna go, well, Ed, but we're doing something in 2023. Well, is there some kind of measurement about what we would expect in 2023? Are we going in that right direction? Does it see, because I mean, fund balance isn't something you just, write a check and here it is. There are things that you do, and some things you can do the low-hanging fruit, and other things take a little longer. But to me, is that fair to say that's the level of specificity you're looking at in some areas?
Yeah.
Just for perspective, the reason why our previous evaluations were so specific is because there had to be some clear targets. And we had, I think, in the previous evaluations, up to 10 or 15 targets that were being evaluated, different points like public relations or community engagement or parent involvement, all those things. But it led to not being so broad and being very narrow and there was consensus among all of us on what that needed to be, which I think was helpful in ensuring that we were measuring progress points. So I would say that getting back to that model may be beneficial. We can be in this EPN type thing, but I personally like the numerical value, just my personal opinion, because I thought from 1 to 5 was your rate, and you essentially could gauge based on that the level of performance. But
So thank you for bringing up the second point, which is we need to have consensus about what the rating system is and what it stands for. Whether it's EPN or whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or it's 1, 3, 4, whatever it is, what does it mean? So again, to your point, we're not going to go with the global make more money because I may think it's 2 million, you're going, no, I think it's 10 million, you're going, I'd be just happy with 20,000. I mean, whatever it is, we have to have clarity. And then does the 20,000 fall into the N, or does that fall into the P, or the 3, or the 4? I mean, you can become that specific. The key thing is on this side, y'all have to come to consensus with what that is, and then say, okay, so does this match? Is it clear? Because in a SMART, S-M-A-R-T, goal, the other is it attainable in the time period? Okay, that's the piece. Or are you going to scaffold it? We want this in 1 year, in 2 years, 3 years, so that the fund balance grows by 10 million over a 5-year period. Okay, well, is that attainable? Okay, that's a conversation so that there is clarity at the beginning of the cycle. Okay. Anything else? So Deanne, so far we have,
So we have clear and clarity, aligned to what we are doing, milestones and measures, student academics, 15 months. I added what you said, Ed. The tool agreed to yearly, typically at the beginning of the cycle, and then using a SMART kind of measure.
so if we use those general elements in whatever it is you decide on for 22, 23, would that provide greater clarity?
Yeah.
Now, I purposely have been focusing this way. So let me ask here, because this is the person who's being evaluated, what is your reaction to that kind of format, or not format's not right, that kind of expectation?
Amazing.
That would make sense, that works. Okay.
The only thing that I would want the board to consider is also all the work that we've done with Leadership ISD. So it goes hand in hand.
Okay. Which is, I think, the point you made earlier about the work we've been working on.
Yeah, exactly, right, because the instrument should live on, and we should all be comfortable with it and applicable to whomever sits in the seat, right? As well as the goals that grow, evolve, adapt to what we've worked on, right? Because that's an equitable approach, it's a balanced approach, ensuring we can have a clear view.
So the only footnote I'm gonna put on that, total sense, as long as none of you change. Because what happens is, I mean, none. You get a new superintendent, you get new board members, their will may be different. They have the right to make the change, okay? I mean, so I just wanna make sure we don't create a falsehood that whatever we decide on for 22, 23 is for the next superintendent who comes in 50 years from now, okay? That's gonna be it, because obviously context everything else. Or who replaces you in 30 years, right? Because that's the way the law is written, it's up to them to make that decision
On a yearly basis.
on a yearly basis.
And something to be looking at here when you're looking at these X to Y by Z is looking at trend data and not just having numbers appear. It's like, how do we, looking back 3 to 5 years about fund balance, how much have we been adding along the way, knowing that we were in COVID, taking that into account, so it's reasonable.
So one last question, and thank you for bringing up when you said Leadership ISD. So there's some data input that I'm assuming is going to go into this, is that correct? Okay. A sense of when we will have that, do you guys know?
We have one more session, and one more 3-hour session with Leadership ISD.
Okay.
And that's.
And then we adopt those goals.
And then,
right?
yeah.
But
I
there
can't
is
remember when
already,
we're gonna have that.
there are already some academic goals in place
Okay.
that the district is working on, and we have some progress measures already for those goals.
Okay.
I don't think though, in hearing that, I don't know if that's still specific enough for what the board would want, because we set those for 5 years. So I think the board wants something even more specific. I think, I could be wrong.
So in that 5-year model, another option, and again, it depends on, you can always set yearly goals within the 5.
Right, we just haven't done that part.
Okay.
I thought those were
Those
what
are
our
the
growth
GPMs.
progress measures are.
I just don't remember them being that specific, but I could be wrong. I just don't remember that we said, 3% or 2%. I could be wrong, maybe.
I think
did.
the
I
progress
think the last
measures.
session
Okay.
we did, yeah.
Okay.
So just a clarification, okay, because of the work that we've done
Yes.
in those, you can have annual targets under the goal and annual targets under the growth progress measures, okay? Because remember, the growth progress measures are like the mile marker that tell you you're on the right road.
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna make one up so our kinder kids, we want their school readiness score to increase from 37% to 48% over a 4-year period. And so you have the 4 years, blah, blah, blah. But the goal may be, we want our kids reading on level at grade 3. Okay, so this, in other words, we're looking at what happens at K, and then but over here, we're gonna have these kinds, so the two should go hand in hand, they should never be in conflict. But you could have annual targets in the progress measures as well as in the overall goal. Okay, so it depends on how it's set up. And here's the reason I'm asking that. So I'm looking towards next steps. So if these are things that are important to y'all, you'll have some agreement around that. Is it reasonable to think that by May, you may have those identified in terms of the goals?
Yes.
Mhm.
Because here's what I'm thinking is, then what you're saying to your superintendent is she has from May to January.
What would we use in June, though?
So I guess part of what would potentially is, I would begin to look at your growth progress measures. So there may be some diagnostics that you're using at, we're using gold, or we're using blah, blah, blah. Here's some preliminary end of the year, this sort of thing. So it's you won't have a terminal point, but you'll have some data. Have we identified it? Do we have things set in motion and ready to go? Okay. Is one possibility.
And you could set your baseline data too, if you don't already have baseline data for some of those.
Yep. Because it's possible you don't, depending on what you're using. And here's the other thing, guys, let's remember, just the state of the union across this state, certainly the country. You may have some third graders sitting in third grade that have not been in school, this is their first year. So that totally messes with some of the data. Okay, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent, it's a reality check. Hopefully that's a small number, but it's more of a number than it has ever been. Okay, and you have kids maybe that aren't even in your pre-K right now that you need to, or they're coming to first grade for the first time. They never had pre-K or K. So that's just a little bit of a challenge.
And how does that fit into this?
Yeah.
Very definitive section.
So again, I think what I'm hearing here is we just need to have clarity about what that looks like for each individual and for the superintendent. So hopefully this gives us some guidance, and hopefully by May, kind of the target of where we would want to be as a board. Any other questions or?
So that I understand, then our process then would be to come to some consensus on some goals between now and May. Reaffirm what format and what instrument that we'll use, if we'll do a blended 1 through 5, or if we'll use the EMP by May, and then actually have the evaluation completed by May? Or would those be all the objectives?
This is for 22-23. Okay, so you would be doing it, if you keep the same sequence, you'd either be doing it in January or February.
Okay, so that's...
Because what you want is knowing the rules of the game starting in May, or whatever that point is, okay?
Okay,
So,
but we still have to deliver something this year.
and that's the topic of closed session,
Okay.
okay? The other is, and I don't want to forget it, it's on here, but is that, and you mentioned it, we need to make sure we have agreement, whether it's EPN 1 through 5 or whatever it is, agree what it is and what it means. You know, E means this, I know what it says, but do we have a common of how we would rank that? Okay.
Need to calibrate.
Thank you. Okay. And it doesn't mean you have to convince each other that it has to be this.
But my E should be in the same range as everybody else's
Right.
in terms of.
I mean, the closer you can get, we call that integrated reliability.
Right.
Okay, I mean, that's helpful. And if somebody feels very strongly about something, you can talk about that in the next portion of the meeting about how you handle those things. All right. Well then, ma'am, I would say that
All right.
open session, unless there are other questions, is done.
Well, then at this time, 7:33, we will go into closed session. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, consider and discuss evaluation and possible new goals for the superintendent. The time now is 9:36. We are reconvening in open session, and at this time, is there a motion?
I move that we move forward with the superintendent's evaluation as discussed in closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded, and we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Canoyer?
Aye.
Ms. King?
Aye.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mr. Diaz?
Aye.
Ms. Eden?
Aye.
Renee Pichelle, aye. Motion is unanimous. We will move forward and, pardon me?
We don't have to say he's not.
When,
We will move forward and proceed with the evaluation as discussed in closed session. So at this time, thank you everyone for being here, especially our facilitators, thank you.
Thank you.
Time is 9:36 and we will adjourn.
And Betty, we said we needed one more date for something else, right?